with a very, very brief presentation that I've brought for all of you today. It's very, very brief to the extent that it's just about 6 slides, but it packs a lot of matter within that 6 slides. Because I strongly believe that in a field like human resource, the less said, the better, because it's the work that we do which speaks for itself. But when we actually try penning it down in more words than we ought to, it just becomes verbose and becomes more storytelling than anything else. So with that, I'm going to start off my presentation. Just give me a minute to load it here for you. I hope that's audible to all. Sham, it's okay?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay,
It's perfectly
thank
fine.
you. So the topic today on which I'm going to try and negotiate my way is negotiating HR to create value at the workplace amidst chaos and change. If you see for yourself, these two words, chaos and change, packs a punch, because change, of course, we know is probably the biggest constant. It has always been there since time immemorial, continues to happen over the years, over decades, is happening as we speak, and probably will continue to happen even as our generation next takes over from us. So that's not something which is unique. We've all been part of many change movements and seen a lot happening around us. But what's also happening alongside change is a bit of chaos. And that chaos is something which is so unstructured, it is so unprecedented and completely unexpected that all of us suddenly find ourselves thinking on 2 feet. Probably there never has been an occasion where we have been forced to sort of reinvent our own professions, our own function. So, as an HR professional, if I were to look at what was I doing about 5 years back, even 2 years back for that matter, I would have a very plain laced kind of an answer. I would have all the sub functions of HR to quote, which is starting from recruitment to separation, perhaps, and all the other sub functions in between that goes into managing an employee's life cycle. The only thing that I'd probably talk about in terms of change coming in would be a lot of the machine identity coming into the place, a lot of man machine collaboration, which is also going to affect human resource in multiple ways. So that would have been probably the only thing that I would have talked about in terms of change coming in. However, today the scenario looks a little different. And let's just go ahead and see for ourselves that what are we really talking about when we say that what is this chaos that we are talking. So let's look at what do we really mean when we are talking about this chaos and change at the workplace. If I'm sure a lot of you would have obviously heard about this gentleman called Stephen Covey. He is one of the biggest management gurus that has ever happened in our lifetime. And Stephen Covey has a wonderful concept called the circle of concern vis-a-vis the circle of influence. I hope some of you at least have had the good fortune to read up on these very beautiful concepts. They are commonplace concerns, commonplace concepts which relate to reality. They're not theoretical, they're not textual. And that's the reason why I thought I'm going to start off this discourse of my masterclass with these very, very important concepts that we have from Covey. His version is that in any workplace where human resource is important and is in place, we need to be aware and we need to be very much in control of what are those issues which are of concern to us, and what are those issues where we definitely need to have a certain amount of influence. For instance, if there is a grapevine and there is a load of gossip which is happening as part of the unstructured and a completely unmanned kind of communication channels happening across the organization, and it has a lot of negative bearing, and it actually has more negatives than possibly it is healthy for the organization, then it definitely becomes a part of the circle of concern, and it therefore becomes important for human resource as well as the stakeholders to be concerned about that particular area in principle. Compared to that, if there is another place, for instance, delegation. Okay, it's important to understand how delegation should happen, how delegation needs to have a mainstay in teams, how delegation adds to bringing up team members in the right way and gives them an opportunity to showcase their work outside of what their superiors always bring them to do. Now, that is definitely an area which is a circle of influence, because that is an area, if not happening well, then it affects a large number of people working within that organization, and therefore should be a matter which draws our attention before it becomes a circle of concern. So that is how beautifully Stephen Covey discussed areas in an organization which needs for us to be on top of them, which would be the circle of influence, and the others where things are probably not going well, and therefore it necessitates our attention on an urgent basis, which becomes the circle of concern. So these are the two very important principles which today have become a contrast in the workplaces. And that's also heightened because of the very recent phenomena that struck us world across in the last 12 months, because we have already completed a full 12-month cycle of the pandemic. Though in different countries it struck in different ways, it obviously brought about its own nuances, but India obviously underwent tremendous amount of influence of this pandemic. By virtue of the fact that India is part of the emerging market scenario, there were tremendous amount of repercussions that hit the corporate world. Apart from the corporate, even the academic institutions were hit quite bad. And together, it's the generation today, the people who are already at the workplaces, along with the one generations who are yet to come in but are standing at the threshold, who have been in various ways affected by this pandemic. And that has brought about tremendous amount of chaos and change at the workplace. Now, what are these changes we could be talking about? The changes could be a supervisor leaving. The changes could be workload increasing. The changes could be prioritization of different kinds happening and changing from time to time. And finally, changes could be social relations degenerating. For instance, if you were to take this pandemic itself as an important aspect of our work life today, then look at what's happening in the midst of all of it. Firstly, there is tremendous amount of uncertainty and insecurity which is sitting both in the external environment as well as in the minds of the people. So even if I were to look at myself as a manager, there would be a certain amount of insecurity, not perhaps with the respect to my competence and my qualification and my area of work, but in terms of a generic workload, generic question about where do we go from here? How is this changing the complete ideology that we've been carrying about workforce management? Because today we are looking at a workforce which is strictly demarcated between a large proportion now having to undergo what is known as work from home, which was earlier more an exception than the rule. But thanks to the pandemic, it has suddenly become a reality for us today, and perhaps going to have a mainstay as a part of the reality even for tomorrow. So when we have these new loads and the new realities being thrown at us, then obviously it brings with it a certain amount of shake in place. It's almost as if your comfort zone has got a little shaken up. When comfort zones are shaken up, what becomes imperative is that each one of us scales up our skills, scales up our abilities and competences to be able to look at what can we do in these new realities to be able to have control over the situations. And that's probably what the main essence of my dialogue with you today is going to be, which is how do we negotiate HR? Okay, HR is not likely to change, but how do we strategically negotiate HR in delivering solutions which is going to actually meet head on the challenges that have been thrown at us because of the recent chaos and changes that have taken place? Another very important thing that's happened, which has led to some bit of this chaos, is absolute negative drama at the workplace. Now, negative drama is a concept which is not new. Negative drama and positive drama are two concepts which have always been there at the workplace from time immemorial. It is also said that just like a little bit of gossip in, when you say grapevine, grapevine can be a great source of information in a non-structured manner if cultivated properly. Similarly, certain amount of negative drama at the workplace has always been there, and through it you also come to realize that who are the people who are more of the jovial, the extrovert, the ones with who have the positive energy to push through any kind of situation, and who are the others who carry with them the necessary negativism, which at the drop of a hat, with the turn of an event, are ready to have a spiraling and a rippling effect across the workplace. So all these have their own merits. They all have their own management space, as we call it, under the sun in every organization. But today, unfortunately, again, because of what's really happened in the recent past, the negative drama has taken a lot of our mind space. Today, when we look at the workforce per se, when we look at a certain amount of 60 to 70%, even more in some cases, of workforce having been relegated to actually leave their social space of being working in an office, but now relegated to work from one corner of their homes. Okay, what has really set in is a lot of negativity, a lot of unwellness, a lot of psychological anxiety, as we call it, and a lot of wellness has come under view, has come under the purview of matters. We never used to have a concern as large as on wellness of our workforce as we are today. We are looking at psychologically a lot of people being very badly affected because of this umbilical cord of the social system being completely taken away from them. Think about it. You walked into your office in the morning. Even if you would have a bad day with the boss, breathing down your neck, or he's shouting at you for two things not having been done as per the timeline, you still enthralled at the fact that regularly you would take a little bit of a coffee break. You would walk down a few mortals down the corridor. You would go to a vending machine, and in the pretext of picking up your cup of coffee, would de-stress by indulging in a little bit of a pep talk and a little bit of a side talk with all other colleagues from other departments. Now, wasn't that a great social factor? Wasn't that a great equalization where you felt that you were part of a bigger community? You came back home, you had tales to tell, you had different stories to narrate, you had some things which made you smile, and some things which probably didn't make you smile, but then that was part of life. You still felt good about going back to work the next day. But today, what's going back to work? Most of us are looking at, oh my God, it's the same monitor, it's that same laptop, it's that same Zoom or MS Teams or what have you. It's that unbelievably, unending calls, irrespective of what time of the day it is. The fine line difference between what is a Saturday and when does it move into a Sunday and what is my day off has also become absolutely blurred. Today, you actually are working 24 by 7. It's almost as bad as that. For the fairer gender, which is the women folk, having to balance their work at home, now with even the child around the corner and wanting more time and space from the mother, it is an uphill task, believe you me. And this is all building up stress and negativity like never before. So when we look at, what's the recent chaos, what's the recent change, so palpable, so particular about, we're talking about negative drama, which has really come to take its place at the workplace today. Because today's workplace, for a lot of us, is actually the home. Okay. The, the other part, the chaos, again, a tremendous amount of push has come because of the work life balance induced stress. Now, when this whole thing broke loose, and when suddenly we realized that the digital medium was actually going to be the only stable state operation through which we could build teams, which we could talk together, we could have meetings, that became the way of life. At every instance, you were expected to be there, irrespective of what time of day or night it was, to attend to a meeting called at a jiffy, because it was felt, there was almost a feeling that without your physical presence, if you did not continue to converse over a certain amount of this digital space on a regular basis, your affinity to address work on a real-time basis would go away. Your competence to handle situations at work would actually be negated. Therefore, this was a tremendous pressure which was built upon large parts of the workforce across the length and breadth of the country, wherein you were expected that you had to be on a call irrespective of what other important thing could be happening at the back end or something that was calling you for its attention. So this stress that came about because of this tremendous difficult way of balancing work and life is another factor which has become a very, very heightened existing part of our lives today. And irrespective of how much we talk about being able to sort things out or look at, how we can mitigate the effects of it, it continues to play havoc at our households, at the back doors. Okay, and you have only to ask the family members of the workforce in order to know the true story. Moving on, other changes causing disruption, and this is real disruption. And when I say disruption, this is not disruption of a positive nature. Unfortunately, most of it is disruption of a negative nature. We're looking, therefore, at businesses which direly needs restructuring, affecting organization structuring too. This is because if 60 to 70% of your workforce could be mandated to sit and work out of home tomorrow, where's the need for this elaborate infrastructure that most organizations have set up for themselves? We're talking about large scale, okay, operational inconsistencies which are going to come in because the earlier model of 100% physical presence of a workforce is now probably going to move towards a direction of hybrid, wherein there would be certain amount of people who would still be required to come into office, maybe at regular basis or maybe intermittently, but there are going to be at least a large chunk of the population who will still continue to work out of home. So the focus of also the organization, the incumbent HR departments, as well as the superior officers of such workforce will now be as to how to create work-ready homes for the workforce so that the agony, the stress of having to do this on a day on and daily basis is actually reduced to a great extent. The second most important thing we are looking at, which also is a change which is tugging at its reins, is revamping the performance management system. As we go along, you'll realize that those days of annual assessment of your performances is soon going to become a myth. A lot of organizations are already realizing that when so much of happening on a quarter basis, there is a pandemic, there is a surge in cases, resulting in large number of people to be consciously told to go back home and stay there. you know uh, in such situations, you've got to be ultra sensitive about how you deal with people when you bring the goodies on the table. So that is the reason why probably there's a dire need today to look at performance management in a very objective manner within short-term targets, so that each of those workmen don't have to wait for elongated periods to come to know whether they still have a job or they did earn the money or whatever has befallen the family. Therefore, this is another second important factor which is today hitting the need and the checklist of all of us HR fraternity. Okay, when we look at what is to be done with my organization today. Third, identifying competencies for the organization. Now, here comes another whammy. Okay, what is this industry? What is the type of milieu, industrial milieu that we are working in today? A lot of us would call it the digital space, that we've suddenly launched ourselves into the digital space. Because remember, 2 years back or even perhaps 18 months back, when we were having conferences all across the country on various topics, it was still a time when each one of us, when told to speak on artificial intelligence and digital savviness and gig economy across, we used to laugh. We used to actually say that it is utopian, because you really can't have that many number of people who are working from the back end. You would still need a tremendous number of faces to take on the task from the front. And that was a challenge which was again picked up by these gentlemen, who decided that with the help of one staple, they were actually going to move towards redefining the contours of their organization, and looking at what broad based competencies they needed to have in order to survive and also surmount this difficult period. And they went about their task in meticulous manner. There were a lot of us who also assisted with them in order to find that exact answer. But there are no exact answers to what you can do about identifying the competencies for current day organizations, because we are still in a state of unknown. We still don't know what is it that is waiting for us. We still don't know whether it's going to be a solid state economy again, or it's going to be a mishmash of a large number of congruent identities of people coming into place for different matters. So We are talking about organization where, as I had earlier said, workforce management itself will come under tremendous amount of importance, primarily because we're talking of different kinds of people today. Contrary to what it used to be earlier, which is that almost 100% of the employee base of an organization were on their rolls. They were what were known as the permanent employees. Today, we are slowly and steadily moving to a place where it is more part timers than permanent employees. We are no longer looking at people staying large number of years with us, because we've already now tasted what loyalty can do to you. Because we have those inhibitions and fears amongst us, many a times it becomes difficult, therefore, to come to terms with what exactly are we meant to do with this new situation that we have in our hands. Next one is defining a go-to-market strategy for the organization, which is, this particular this particular question about how we can contribute to the politics and how we can become an integral part of this. Okay, will obviously give you these kind of different choices. Finally, breaking the traditional and the archaic. This is what I meant when I had shuddered when you started narrating the crocodile story. Okay, this is important because it is no longer what used to be the norms of an organization that has brought us this far. It is not going to be that which will get it far from here. We will have to reorganize, we will have to re-strategize, we will have to go back to the boss to the draw boards in our boardrooms and draw up structures which can be well fought and evaluated by different members on a paradigm of competence, on a paradigm of being absolutely relevant in today's market, and therefore that becomes the mainstay for here. Therefore, when we are talking about a digital space, a lot of work methods, a lot of ways of life at the working place, all of them itself are becoming an absolute misnomer, because those are no longer going to be the way in which you will be expected to function and deliver your results tomorrow. Okay, so when we look at all these coming to a head together, whether it is from the external space, okay, which we saw a little while back, as well as the internal space, where people having worked in an organization for many years in a particular manner is, however, called back and expected to perform a very different role altogether. That's because today we are looking at a gig economy. And a gig economy is nothing but the highest bidder who comes to any organization offering his or her skills and are actually taken that on by paying a hefty and a good amount of sizable money. That's called a gig economy. And the people who work in gig economies are what are known as digital nomads. They are the best in class. They would have sweated their palms a lot by drawing up large number of important products. But at the same time, even today, if you ask them, they're no longer sure. They may have done what needed to be done, but they're still no longer sure as to what is it that is going to be taking them forward from here. So they keep listening to all kinds of advices which come from different quarters, but at the end of the day, they still remain very confused about what is it in the organization that we can fit into, where do we go from here? And as you see, that's nothing different from what it used to be even 10 years down the line. You always had corporates where there used to be inmates or internal employees, as you call them, and who would have a doubt or two. But once the other person also came and joined and assuaged the feelings, it just became that much more bearable to take the pain and move along. But in today's pandemic, because of social distancing and many other norms which have come into play, things are not happening as seamlessly as it used to happen earlier. So this is what I would say is the length and breadth or the entire background of what's hitting the market today, what's hitting our corporates today. And this is what is making or giving the HR fraternity sleepless nights. So where do we go from here? Now, this is where I talk about how do you negotiate HR, okay, into strategizing, into making sure that you come forth with positions, some amount of learnings, some amount of pure play conditioning in terms of how it can, between three of you, be presented. Okay, so that's something which we need to now look at. Now, when we talk about a new dawn in HR, what is it that we need to do with the dysfunction of HR that we are so well familiar with, and yet there is so much that we don't do? Okay, so the first important statement that I'd like to take up here is set the processes of HR around innovation, both in thought as well as in action. Now, innovation is not just a jargon. Please, my friends, understand. I have seen innovation being used too many times into areas which are not even relevant. But this is something which is so dear to people that they can actually go to great lengths in order to be able to qualify an innovation. So, this is one area where we feel that what it used to be earlier in terms of processes in an organization all dovetailed towards considering the employee to be a physically present 100% employee. However, today, as I just spoke to you about, we have two very different scenarios. We have some number of people still continuing to stay at work and continue to come to offices, but they are in minority today. There are more number of people who are still so insecure about what's in it for us, what's happening to us, how do we look at future for us, that they are questioning even the existing policies and the processes. Therefore, it is very, very important that organizations today create an empowered culture. And when I say empowered culture, it means that you no longer define the borders of your policies and your processes only looking at one part of the workforce who are now very soon, okay, over a period of very number of short years, will actually become and probably will actually become a subordinate to somebody from a generation, is it? So that's what we are talking about. We're talking about new kinds of people. We're talking about a new melting pot in an organization where people are going to be drawn from different enterprises with whom they perhaps not been able to work earlier. So you could have people from retail or frontline coming in and taking important responsibilities in hardcore process-oriented companies, something which may not have been even conceived at that point of time. But and those are probably the good things, okay, that we see happening here, that you're not limited your space by only targeting the existing processes, only making sure that what you have is sacrosanct, but you've gone a few steps ahead in saying that if the movement of the country has to take place and the movement of my organization also has to take place in sync with how the company is going to the country is going to be progressing, then there are a few things which probably I might do or I might give. Okay, and therefore the ways of life, the orientation to the work, the approach, what needs to be taken, okay, is going to be very different from what it used to be yesterday. Is this understood? Because this is a very, very critical concept, and that about innovation, because innovation is not just about thinking differently. Innovation is also about being able to conceive of the whole environment in a very holistic manner, having different ingredients than those which are already with you, because that's the way it makes that particular dish as much robust. Okay, so the next one is redesigning the employee experience. This is again a very, very interesting concept, and it borrows a bit from the innovation concept on top of it. The employee engagement experience used to be very, very simple and easy to do in the years that we've been there. That was because those were the days of long standing awards, long service awards, where people, having stayed back in an organization for more than 10 years, were at least felicitated for that. It is immaterial that when you get into discussions of these kind, a man and a woman of different nationalities, then there are different religious backgrounds, then there are a lot of emotions which comes to the forefront. Okay, a lot of emotions. But what is important for us here in the professional front is to make sure that we don't get swept away by those emotions. If we were to visit any of the places pre-pandemic and now go and visit that post-pandemic, we should be able to tell at least where the masala has been made or what is missing. And that is something which really is an employee experience that needs to undergo a change. Okay. Next one, getting rid of annual cycles in HR. I think I spoke about it sometimes back. This is completely, something which had been brought about in a baronial structure where it was felt that for the time that an competent individual gave to the organization, irrespective of whether it was a man or a woman, okay, they had to be paid a certain amount of feedback as well as remuneration and some kind of benefits at the end of a defined period. Otherwise, there would be no motivation for them to actually be there at all. So that is how the compensation system came into being. But the compensation system is a compensation and the learning and the designing of the annual cycles that we have in our organizations, whether it's the PMS, whether it's the comp and bend systems, whether it's the reward and recognition systems. We have a lot to do in here because today's workforce, whether it's the same temp workers that we're going to get in or the part-time consultants who are going to come, deliver and move away, are people who are a very different breed than what it used to be earlier. Earlier, staying back in an organization was considered a matter of pride. It was considered to be something which was holding you back, and and both the organization as well as the individual were actually felicitated for the same. Not so much today. For a gig worker or a digital nomad or a part timer, how much of a process and how much really of an understanding that you gathered from each other? It's something that I'd like to know. So, when we talk about annual cycles, we have to understand that there would be trials and tribulations. There would be a lot of resistance when we try putting our hands into this. But then at the end of the day, what is important to understand is every organization has to be organic in its system of evolution. Only when it is organic and it keeps its steps along with how the system outside is progressing, that's the only way such organizations can remain solvent. So, in a way, we are quite happy because in our complete circumstances and environment around, we find that the HR fraternity has started moving and started moving quite okay now. There was a time in the initial bracket where we were found, with our feet handing, but today it's a great cause. I think we're doing enough in order to challenge some of these very, very archaic systems like annual cycles, the reward and recognition schemes of putting a token money for somebody having spent 5 years of valuable time. Just doesn't read well, just doesn't look well. So those were definitely areas at the back of the mind of entrepreneurs who needed to now look at how did they structure their organizations politely so that many a times they did not have to go from here to there to find their solutions. Moving away from traditional team structures. Now, this is again a very, very new phenomena and something which is definitely likely to present different kinds of scenarios, challenges, and endeavors in front of the whole organization. Because we're talking about traditional wage organizations. If we are able to stop this and move ahead, it'll be better for the organizations as well as for people outside. But then you never know. If we have to get into a matrix organization, not only from a hierarchical point of view, but also from a development, as well as what were the words heard, those kind of things, I think this is a very, very important aspect of moving away from traditional team structures. Because if you were to hang on to traditional team structures, then there would be time when the time would only be good for subject matter experts like Manoj Kumar. uh, they're all connected in LinkedIn, where I wish one could obviously talk about it because these are organizations which are breaking the barriers. These are organizations which are completely doing away with their lackadaisical thoughts about how an organization should be traditionally configured. Today, they are not only willing to look at a matrix, but they're also trying to look at a hexagonal. They're also trying to look and take advantage and store and probably experiment to a certain extent the impact that such moves could have in taking away part of the tradition of stability that TU has always been enjoying. So, moving away from traditional team structures would obviously be another very, very important aspect of maneuvering HR in today's reality so that you have small, nimble, agile teams drawn from different projects. They come together, they address the work, they attack work together, in a collective thought process, which could actually be more eclectic and more precise than if there would be a linear and a very traditional nuclear factory owner going together, not having been exposed to anything else in God at all, and that you can understand from her body language. Okay, so these important aspects are more psychological. They are subterranean. They are actually more subconscious. They are already existing within us. When we work in different projects, we already mull over it. That am I going to be there in the sickle? Am I going to be there in the first? How am I going to be positioned? So positioning yourself in your mind is also a very, very strong tool, which people in the HR fraternity should be adapting if we are to go in for jobs like this. Last but not the least, HR to remodel itself as an innovator. Now, it's one thing to talk about innovation. It's another thing to say that I'm going to rehaul my policies, my systems, my processes, just like I spoke about at the start of the slide, that I'm going to do a complete rethink on what really needs to be done. Because it's important to understand that different people are talking different language today. While there is a fraternity, there is within the HR fraternity a very large, powerful group who feel that we will go back to our previous industry structures, which is that organizations will not be able to support, okay, till they don't have the price to act. No. So there has to be a time where HR needs to remodel and walk the talk. Because if we are to tell people that you've got to innovate, you've got to change your way of thought, you have to go beyond just a model. So when those things are brought in front, that's the time when HR has to work as a catalyst. Because that's the time when HR reporters will come, put the finger put the finger on the test and say that it is no longer important for us to continue to perform the way we used to be earlier, but can we tweak ourselves to match or fit the particular requirement today, which is very, very critical from an overall organization perspective. Now, that is therefore the comfort zone that HR has to break for itself. So we have intermittently, I have tried to put in important aspects of HR as we have gone along. I did not really, I'm not at all at any point of time suggesting that HR forgets to do all its work that it has been doing till now. HR will continue to do the same work, but probably in a very different fashion. And the next slide will probably tell you how strategically, therefore, HR version of work can be positioned in order to create the rightful role for itself. So this is about new strategies by HR. So define approaches. Today, she seems to be a different person. The first story is defining person. Now, when we look at new strategies, we start to look at defining our approach as per the shifts in demographics. Because today we are looking at organizations where people with only salt and pepper hair or people beyond a certain age group are not necessarily the only ones who would be there in majority. I'm aware of startup companies. One of them, I'm the CHRO of one, but I know of another startup company where possibly they work much more than a stable state organization, primarily because even though they have good projects in their kitty and very sparsely located people, somehow when you don the hat of an entrepreneur, it becomes a very different approach altogether. And I really, really want you to do that because that will bring to the forefront a lot of changes that you need to empathize with in the mind itself about defining approaches today towards your own workmen, your own workforce in a manner so that they are not hurt by any other strenuous things that come into the being. So today, when you look at workforce management, as we said, today's workforce is not just the old fuddy-duddies. They are not just boys from the old school. They are not just evening people just wanting to wrap up their work, but it's a whole lot of all. And making the situation even more chaotic and difficult to control are a part of the Marines, a part of international forces who are all evincing their interest in what? In our own vaccine. And on the pretext of that, they are all thinking of coming in and remodulating the organizations in order to take advantage of this current trend. The other one, in terms of strategy that we need to really look at, is this whole organizations and individuals having undergone shocks of their own at their own level has not only affected everybody in a very, very linear manner, but also in multiple ways. Today, we are also looking at ushering in artificial intelligence at the workplace. Okay, there's going to be man machine collaboration, which is going to be the first thing that everybody would be keen to see and also follow, provided they give you the kind of benefit that these bags are supposed to be meant to do. The other ones are attending to perceptible changes in life priorities. For instance, today we find that baby boomers are actually marrying very late. If that session is completed, then we have reasons to pack for night. But that is an important, very, very important area that we need to ponder about, which is attending to perceptible changes in life priorities. So when people will get aged late, when people therefore will think about not having a baby and not changing the kind of workforce compatibilities that have been there today, and looking forward to something which they were not really used to. For if you recall, I said about even 18 months back, when we were standing at podiums at different conferences and seminars, we would talk about artificial intelligence as if it was something which was on its way, but it would take about 2 to 3 years to come and hit us. So there was an air of nonchalance. There was an air of resignation. It was almost like, oh, that's some time away. However, it didn't come out like that. It did not come out like that at all. So, and that's not the point. The point is that these life changes and these life priorities need to be mapped. They need to be mapped. When we say that work from home will become a reality for our people from tomorrow, if not today itself, then we need to also make sure that the infrastructure which is provided to him from the office is top notch. The other part that is important is balancing of emotions at the workplace. And when I say workplace, it's all your hearts, it's all your love. Okay, when we talk about balancing those life priorities, HR has a tremendous role to play in becoming an agony aunt. HR has a huge role to play in just listening. Sometimes half the battle won is through listening. And that is important because in this kind of chaos that we are talking about, this whole discourse today is all about where does HR fit in? What does HR do in order to control the chaos and the slight dent in conviction that has come about, perhaps in the store itself, okay, depending on how the owners are reacting. Okay, so it is important as soon as we realize that there is a work pattern which is evolving and which perhaps needs to be risen, needs to be just taken in its wake and build upon that, because it is not going to be a single day's adventure. It's actually going to be multiple approaches coming together, addressing different issues, and one by one things will fall in place. The next one is continue to demonstrate empathy and compassion at the workplace. So no rocket science. There seems to be the left and the right hands of human resource aspirants. And yet, one of the things that we need to continuously keep in mind is when things are so much at a low ebb, when people are fighting on all limbs, when there is so much of insecurity and uncertainty about where do we go from here, how do we go from here, okay, and all the obvious questions, then it becomes our moral responsibility, besides the fact that our functionality is also like that, but it also belongs our moral responsibility for one of the best things that had happened in that year till now. Therefore, we have to continue to demonstrate empathy and compassion with the cooks who were especially mixing and matching khoya and pista or kuch aur hai. And this is an interesting way of looking at how to really take empathy and compassion to the next level. Because We talked about different kinds of workforce. We talked about people whose loyalties will be questionable. When you have gig economy and when you have only temp workers who come and work for a certain period of time at a certain cost and the taka is thrown back, then it's obvious what does it give an impression of? Okay, so people values are already hit. As we said, people are nervous, people don't know what's ahead of them, they are still waiting for the best, but at the same time there is a gnawing worry at the back of their minds that is there going to be a job for me tomorrow. One hears that that organization has let off so many people. That organization has suddenly done a turnaround and has made sure that some people who were given a guarantee for appointment was, however, not taken in. So there are going to be those scenarios and much more till we have clarity on the same. But according to me, and I have always held this particular thing true, that every success, irrespective of how long or how short, should be definitely a cause of concern for us, and definitely a cause whereby we should be able to make the best out of it. We have to make sure that as human resource professionals, our empathic side, our compassion, our ability to step into the shoes of the other person, extend ourselves to them, and alleviate their fears is something that is a job that we do without any compromise. And that is perhaps one of the reasons why the HR fraternity today are facing a lot of existential questions of their own. And that's something which I will come to in just about 5 minutes' time. Um, the last thing that I'd like to talk about here is people analytics tool will recalibrate efficiencies for HR. So when we are talking about artificial intelligence, we are talking about machine learning, we are talking about all patterns of work which is now coming under threat, primarily because of the fact that the digital world has slowly and steadily taken over the mind space of many of us. Okay, as a result of which, it is also important that we give back, okay, what we do get or whatever we need to reap. Okay, it is important we do that by extending the best possible humane faith and the humane ability that each one of us brings to the table, because perhaps no time has required the competence of the HR manager as much as this today. So the chaos and the change and the recalibration and all of that I have been sort of thinking and putting things together, uh, it is important that we also exercise the same, because only by doing so and only by making sure that bringing man and machine in a fruitful collaboration together can we actually take HR delivery to the next level. Because our wishful thinking will neither stop the onward parade of further and further digitalization and reasons for people no longer to be on the roads. They can actually work in different patterns of employment, including retired people, including women who have never ventured out of home. So there are different segments also in the market today from the workforce who are now being contained and now being considered as actual, pedigree who can be trusted upon. So these are challenges. People analytics. Today, human resource departments and human resource professionals know that rather than give vent to their gut feel, rather than go by, buying very rich stuff, no, and apart from the fact that they continue apart from the fact that they continue to do what they have been doing for a large time till date, which is, doing their jobs, recruiting, resourcing people, making sure that performance management happens on time, certain amount of reward and recognition happens on time. They also need to understand that they have to now go that extra mile in order to make sure that everything that they do for the good being of others. This is not an individual game anymore. This is not a man game anymore. This is a man and machine combination game that is now into play. And through a combination of the best efforts of man and machine, we will actually evolve this function of HR to the level where it is not just human feeling and gut, but it has to be also based on analytics and big data and a lot of factual data which is churned out in the large manner, we will actually have indications, which will have indicators. Okay, we will have trend analysis. We will actually have answers to large number of questions that we sometimes toy with and are unable to, make things work better. So the world is a big one out there for us, especially for the human resource professionals. Nothing is more challenging than how it is today. As I had just said a little while back, probably the competence, the ability of an HR professional, so much is required today. Probably no other time has asked for it in such big manner. But that's a huge challenge sitting with us. It's not the time to get into skirmishes. This is not the time when we look at the other person and say, oh, she's doing better, or he's doing better, or is he doing better. This is not the time for comparisons. This is the time for HR to scale up. This is the time for HR to understand that apart from the people interactivity and touch factors that we are seemingly supposed to be experts in, we also need to become business managers who understand how working with artificial intelligence as well as working with machine is going to help us in our delivery at the end of the day. With that, I come to the end of my structured presentation, and through that presentation, I've basically tried to bring to you a perspective of the kind of workplace that we are facing today. The workplace has undergone tremendous changes. It's almost like a tectonic shift. Just like earthquakes happen and tectonic shifts happen with different sediments of stones, moving from one line to another, and that is the reason why even the earth starts shaking up. What we had in terms of the pandemic is similarly one of the same kind. It exposed to us different ways of life. It exposed to us vagaries which we were not aware of. It exposed to us our own abilities to either scale up or to fall short. It also exposed a tremendous number of fall bys of what happens when you are not able to be in sync, okay, with the environment around you. So HR, as I say, always is not likely to make a big change. It is not supposed to go and leap into something different. But being a fundamental factor and being such an important part of the CEO's team, we always have to be well equipped with knowledge, with competence, with ability, with sharp mindedness, and with the normal skill of common sense. That's what will make sure that HR professionals, even going forward, will continue to reap benefits, will continue to fit into the milieu, and become as successful as some of the other leaders of yesteryear. Thank you so much. With that, I would like to close my prepared presentation on this particular topic about negotiating HR, to add value to the workplace in the times of chaos and change. I'm of course open for any questions that you may have right now. So please, I'll be very happy to take them on as we go along. Thank you.
So, how do we effectively negotiate to ensure that there is a win-win situation for employees and employer, particularly in time like current situations?
Okay, so a win-win situation is, I mean, sometimes I feel that some of these terms, though they seem cliched, but they don't outlive their utility. In the current situation where, as I said, there is so much which is insecure, which is uncertain, and believe you me, irrespective of how high up we are or how erudite and how competent we are, each one of us today, when we have a few minutes to spare and we introspect, it's really hard to fathom how could something like this pandemic, what scale, what size, and the way it came and actually swamped this entire corporate segment. It becomes very difficult to actually hold your own and not feel emotional about what's really happening in the industry today. Having said that, I think it's important to understand that there are no choices before us. We are the human race, okay, and I believe we are the human race, by any explanation of how we came to be or what our evolution story is. The human mind is the most intelligent, okay, the most intelligent asset, and the most incredible asset that you have with you at any point of time. Now, irrespective of how we were yesterday and how we need to be today, uh, it goes on to, and as I described during the course of the conversation and the discourse that I had, human resource will need to scale up because the learnings of human resource is all out there. Okay, one of the biggest things that's happened is every kind of change that is now affecting the organization has a direct repercussion on business. Okay, and when business comes under pressure because of all that's happening out in the market, the one of the key things that the CEO as well as the board and every other stakeholder falls back on are the efficiencies that can be drawn from other parts of the organization. So when you look at the other parts of the organization, then it's important that the role of HR becomes more prominent than ever before. Because who do you have? What's the biggest asset that any organization has? It's human capital, right? It still continues to be the person. Because every other thing, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's the buildings of concrete and steel, whether it's the beautiful tables and desks inside, or whether how many photocopier machines you have, or how much money is actually stashed away, or the product or the service that you give, nothing moves unless the human mind moves, unless the human mind is motivated enough to come back to office or to get up in the morning, irrespective of where he's working out of, and go to that desk and start working in a manner so that he's able to make some choices, he's able to make sure that the job gets done to the best of the ability, and also he can walk over to his superiors as well as to his teams to intermotivate them to make sure that the effort doesn't fall flat. So there is no other option or choice before any organization today, okay, but to make sure that the HR department remains motivated and in complete clue with what really needs to happen, okay. And apart from that, we should also understand that to be a win-win, the organization also has to come some distance, and it is for the organization to therefore, and in this current milieu, take some steps. So today we have human resource departments looking at you know, extending benefit packages which will actually help employees working from home. They're also looking at setting up infrastructure so that if we are going to make sure that 60% of the people in my organization are going to be having the status of work from home, can we therefore launch a package which is called work ready homes, so that by virtue of certain amount of one time investment as well as doing things in an optimal manner, the organization is able to take away that little bit of a worry from the minds of the worker, that don't worry, if you really have to work from home, the minimum that I can do from the organization is to make sure that you do have an enabling corner at home from where you can do the work. So here's your space, here's your table, here's your broadband, here's everything that you wanted, and you can just sit there and start going. So through these optimal kind of revisiting of policies, repositioning of benefit factors, it's something that I spoke about in my presentation about just being innovative and making sure that you don't keep repeating what you have done till now, because that's not likely to be the answer. Okay. Therefore, you need to do things a little differently today. You need to look at how much of the envelope can you push, how can you be the champion of people as well as also lobby with the management to make sure that you get both sides to marry into your idea and give the organization a win-win situation. That's what I
Beautiful,
would feel here.
beautifully answered, Devshan. Okay, so there is a question from Parvati: how to deal with bossy HR or maybe moody HR, who how to cope up with him even if you are right and you need a request for certain help.
Yeah, I formally believe, a bossy HR is no HR. Okay. Having said that, um, the HR fraternity, and please pardon me for being so candid about it, but since the question is out in the open, I would also like to make a clean breast of it. The HR fraternity are of two very distinct kinds. The ones who are risk takers and who decide to make a real impact on the face of work. They are the ones who will take risks on your behalf. They are the ones who will champion your opinion before the management. They are also the ones who will balance the whole thing with the management and also make sure that your last word is heard. Okay. Now, there will also be the people who will not take on frivolous requirements. They will not be the kinds who will unnecessarily pander to negativity. They will not be people who will unnecessarily listen to gossip. So, they will not be your cohorts in any of those kinds of activities. So, that's one kind of an HR who do well, who leave an imprint, but at the same time, they are hard to get around because they stand for those qualities very sharp. Now there's another group. Okay, there's the second group, which is relatively efficient, which is good in their own ways, but unfortunately don't believe in taking too many risks. And when they don't believe in taking too many risks, they will also not be the kind of person who will unnecessarily venture out and try and do whatever little they can. Okay, they will venture out, but the moment they feel that their interest is threatened, they withdraw. That perhaps is a more difficult HR to deal with than a bossy HR. Okay, a bossy HR is an attitude, it's a behavioral syndrome, and there can be ways in which you can deal with the behavioral syndrome. But an HR which does not believe in taking a position for you, because what's an HR? An HR person is supposed to be the balance, okay, the link between two chain factors. Similarly, here also the effort was being made, but if the effort is not congruent with the nature of the person who, beyond a point, is unwilling to take that risk, then it falls flat. That effort doesn't bear fruit. So, little twist in from the question that was asked, dealing with bossy HRs. Well, there are systemic ways and process ways by way of which you can handle them. You just need to, just to give you a little example, and I don't want to be getting caught in this, but if you have a really bossy HR who's shouting at you, who's not listening to you, who is using words which are not gracious, okay, and all of that, just go to your what is it called, the disciplinary committee in your organization. Okay, just go to any disciplinary committee and lodge a complaint saying that this is the conduct of a manager. Okay, and a manager is a responsible individual in the organization. Okay, and you very clearly say that if this could be happening to me, who is probably one of the senior most in the organization, what can be happening to you? If you ask those existential questions, believe me, people will wake up. And even that bossy manager will know that survival will become an issue if he or she does not take charge immediately or does something alternative. So these are the bossy part you can live with a lot by ignoring. If it becomes too much, like a little sore, then just as you both did, just killed it. And if, however, there are managers who are not willing to take your side and who are not really interested to go that extra mile, now that's somebody you really need to take up. You need to voice your concern because he or she would be in the process of killing the efficiencies within your organization. So that's how I look at that.
Okay. Okay. This question from Kansha Thakur. How can you balance your professional life and personal life while working from home? Because we know that we have lots of work burden than earlier it was.
Yeah, it's a very, very important, very critical question, and thank you, Akanksha, for raising it. It's actually one of the most topical items today, and we have been speaking endlessly on many forums. I probably have been on at least three to four forums by now, where we have only tried to address women related issues, especially pandemic and the post pandemic. We're calling this post pandemic, though I know for sure that we are not over it. So doesn't matter. You see, for the woman, it's a double whammy. It's really a double whammy. because as such, till the time the woman had a place to go to, right? It was like a release for her. And let's understand this. Let's not run away from the truth. I am also a woman. For the little time that I used to be away from home, it wasn't that I was abrogating my responsibility. I would still look back, call up multiple times, find out if things were being controlled. I would still have my support system who would give me regular updates on whether my child was being taken care of. Okay. There would be all kinds of systems put in place, which would be my responsibility to absolutely ensure that irrespective of where I am at work, it could be Delhi, it could be China, it could be anywhere else in the world. I, as long as the infrastructure is guaranteed, and as long as I am on top of the information, there was not much harm in my going out to work. Rather, it maintained a certain amount of casual, give and take between the two partners in such situations, where one was able to understand that yes, this break, for a career woman, this break of actually moving out and going to an office and handling a role of responsibility was equally important and equally critical, just like for the man himself. Now come back to today's situation where the woman is now squarely in the position of a homemaker, right? I'm consciously calling it homemaking, second innings, because everything else is home. Everything is home. Your emotions are home. Your child rearing is home. Your ability to negotiate with the rest of the family is at home. So everything is actually happening like a tamasha movie. Everything that's out there, the stress that you have, that while you are attending a Zoom call, you know that you have to now get up, the time is rough, you have to get up to prepare at least some little morsels of food, but you're unable to do it because your calls are not finishing. Look at the other side of it. A little child of 3 to 4 years doesn't understand what's a Zoom call, right? And yet, when mummy is sitting in front of the laptop, the little kid is shouting because he's been withheld by maybe his daddy or his father or somebody like that, because they don't want him to go where mummy near is, because that will not be looked upon as very well. So it's a double whammy for women. And I my heart goes out to them, because there are a lot of complaints that I get to hear. I am a coach, and I also mentor a lot of young women in their professions. So I get a lot of messages as well as different vehicles, because not only is it a question of badgering of women, where because of being there physically present, you are expected that you will take charge of home affairs as much as you give time to hearth affairs. That's very, very submissive, and that's something I would not like to advise women to get into. But then you need to take your position and make sure that you carve out a place for yourself, because otherwise this can drive you to sanity.
Beautifully
And
answered.
that is where we are hearing a lot of cases today where as I had talked about, mental wellness of women being a major issue today, anxiety disorders surfacing tremendously. So these are very sorry state of affairs, and I wish we actually see through this period at the earliest.